Joshi and Dr. Joseph George, learned members of the teaching faculty, my good friend Rahul, who was primarily instrumental for my participation today. And I feel honored by the kind invitation extended by the management of St. Joseph's College to address the staff and students on the Great Reset and emerging business opportunities. As Rahul has developed a great feeling of oneness and sense of belonging to the college where he studied, I also inculcated the same sense of belonging to St. Joseph's College because I am an old student of St. Joseph's College, Trichy. And generally, institutions run by Catholics and Christians, they really serve the purpose of education. The purpose of education is to make the students intellectually trained, morally upright, spiritually inspired, and socially committed. As evidenced by the intellectual smugness, proven intellectual smugness of Rahul and his style of functioning, his total personality in terms of attitude and values, lend credence to the way St. Joseph's College achieved the purpose. My sincere congratulations to the management and staff of St. Joseph's College. I had to be apologetic about what went wrong. There is no control on technical snack. We don't know. And we were struggling. In a way, it is good. In life, from each bad thing, there is always something good stemming. If you reflect on your own life, many good things and bad things happened. But when you reflect deeply on all the bad things that happened in your life, you will realize that something good stemmed from that bad thing. This precisely happened today. Due to technical snack, we could not be globally connected. And I would say this enabled us to understand the practical meaning of reset, the great reset. Resetting means when something does not work, we reset, we press the button for resetting. If it does not work again we reset. So economic development is an ongoing process with a constant injection of restructuring. Today, triggered largely by technological marvels. This is what is happening. So we were struggling to reset in order to be connected with each other. I can give you a typical example to add practical meaning to resetting, the great economic reset which is going on in the wake of all forms of ramifications triggered by COVID-19. The best example is actually the economic development history of East European countries. For decades, these countries were depressed, oppressed, and suppressed under communist regime. We all know that. In spite of excellent infrastructural base, utility services, and high level of literacy rate. What is literacy rate? Literacy rate refers to the percentage of literates imbued with capabilities and skills to use modern technology and to commercialize new knowledge. In spite of all these key determinants of rapid economic transformation, these economies, East European economies, could not achieve rapid economic transformation. In relative terms, compared to Western countries and members of the OECD countries, these countries remained in the state of underdevelopment. They could not come out. They had everything. Very great mathematicians, physicians, doctors, engineers, you name anything. Excellent science education, excellent mathematics education. All these things they had. But they were in the clutches of something. They could not relieve themselves from the clutches of underdevelopment because one factor was missing. That was global connectivity. So at one point, they decided to reset their economies. The Iron Curtain fell. Once the Iron Curtain fell, global connectivity was established. So suddenly they were exposed to, because of the global connectivity, they were exposed to, for the first time, competitive pressures for efficiency gains. You don't achieve efficiency gain or you don't climb the ladder of efficiency gain unless there is a pressure for you to do that. So they didn't know. For 1 year, they were struggling. So when you embark on a new course of action to reset something, you have to pay what is called a transition cost. So 1 year they were struggling struggling to manage the transition to market economy. And within 1.5 years, many East European countries joined the ranks of the OECD countries. They became developed countries. So what was missing? Global connectivity was the only thing missing. And through by resetting their economies, and by making the Iron Curtain fall, that was a major resetting effort. They established global connectivity, and global connectivity rekindled all forms of new and dynamic growth, paving the way for rapid economic. Czech Republic became a member of OECD, and Slovak Republic became member of OECD. Then Hungary became member of OECD. Poland. Everything happened within 1.5 years. So, in spite of creating determinants in terms of excellent infrastructural base, utility services, high level of functional literacy rate, enhanced skills and capabilities, they could not come out of the state of underdevelopment for decades now. The resetting process was a great success. Now today, in the wake of the ramifications of the COVID-19, people are talking about resetting economies. We have to reset. Everybody talks of, even World Economic Forum is inviting innovative ideas from young boys and girls, scholars, experts, requesting them to suggest viable avenues of rekindling new and dynamic sources of growth to enable their economies to recover from the depressed state of affairs caused by COVID-19. This is precisely happening. So now let us go to the next slide. This is not the first time we are resetting. The title is Resetting Then and Now. Several times, the global economy plunged into deep economic crisis. Let us start with the 1930s, the Great Depression. The Great Depression started in 1929 in the US, and there was high level of unemployment. People were thrown out of job. Production failed, all the supply chain failed, and it was chaos. It started with the Great Recession, then plunged into Great Depression. And they didn't know what to do. Americans didn't know what. It affected the entire world. The reason, lack of effective demand. People's wants were not backed by purchasing power. They were not able to command goods and services for want of money. When President Roosevelt assumed office, he said the only fear we have to fear is fear itself. Then he treated the entire American economy as a Keynesian laboratory and implemented all the tools, interventions, policy interventions suggested by John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist. He said, John Maynard Keynes said, come on, just see to it that people are armed with the money. Embark on big infrastructural projects, get people empowered in that, let them get high salary, and when their purchasing power is enhanced, naturally the effective demand, the demand for goods and services will grow, and there will be supply response from the firms and farms. So this is how they recovered. So the resetting was in terms of increasing the effective demand of the people, giving more money in the hands of the people. And it worked very well. By 1933, American economy was fully recovered from the Great Depression of 1930s, and it had its positive spillover effects on other economies of the world. So this was the way they were resetting. Then 1973 first oil shock. It was for the first time oil price exceeded $100 a barrel. Everybody was stunned to silence. It used to be $40, $60, once even $25. Suddenly, it exceeded $100 per barrel. Then most of the economists predicted very gloomy picture about the growth prospects of developing countries. They thought, come on, oil is very essential. If the oil prices go up, it will affect cost of production, cost of doing business. and the developing countries will be completely doomed. Against those predictions, it was only after the first oil shock and second oil shock, many countries emerged as newly industrializing countries. And few countries emerged as emerging economies of the world. The first and second generations of newly industrializing countries emerged. Republic of Korea, Taiwan province of China, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. All these countries emerged as newly industrializing countries, thanks to the oil shock. That's why I said from each bad thing, there is always something good. So only because of the oil shock, people started reflecting on the importance of changing the pattern of production in order to achieve efficiency gain in energy use, residential use, commercial use, and industrial use. I still remember when I was a college lecturer earning only 450 rupees. In the 1970s, I used to ride a Lambretta scooter of 1920s vintage, I would say. That scooter covered only 7 kilometers per liter of petrol. And today what happened? The two-wheelers cover 70 kilometers per liter of petrol. Look at the efficiency gain, thanks to the oil shock. So changing the pattern of production and the priority accent on enhancing energy efficiency occurred because of oil shock. All the predictions went wrong. By the way, hitherto, no economist, you can challenge me, no economist predicted major economic events, and whatever they predicted after major economic events went wrong. They did not see the light of reality. My recent book, titled The Poverty of Economic Thinking, questions all these things. I said all that was said by economists from Adam Smith to the latest are not akin to the brutal ground realities of development. Adam Smith said the end of production is consumption. Today, it is being increasingly proved that the end of production is learning, and learning is continuous. When someone produces a product, he wants to learn from his competitors, comparators, distributors, consumers, etc., in order to effect further improvement on the product to make it superior over other products. So end of production is not consumption, end of production is learning. And David Ricardo, the famous economist, said countries should convert resource-based comparative advantages into competitiveness. Today, the Ricardian theory of comparative advantage is dead. Today, countries are enhancing global competitiveness without resource-based comparative advantages, using human ingenuity as the infinite source of wealth creation. Singapore is the best example. Resource, except human resource. Using human ingenuity as the infinite source of wealth creation, they are at the top of the scale of industrial performance for more than 25 consecutive years. If you look at the ranking of countries on the scale of industrial performance, Singapore tops the list with virtually no resource. So human ingenuity is regarded as the infinite source of wealth creation. You don't need a resource-based comparative advantages at all. Like that, even John Maynard Keynes, I questioned even John Maynard Keynes. He said we should worry about only short-term problems, try to ignore long-term issues, address the short-term issues, because in the long run, we are dead. I would say nations never die in the long run. Even I questioned John Maynard Keynes also. Next time when I come there to your college, I will give you around 20 complimentary copies of that book, The Poverty of Economic Thinking. Then let us go to the next one, East Asian financial crisis. East Asian financial crisis was due to high import intensity of export orientation of East Asian countries funded by short-term lenders. Say they were 100% export-oriented countries, but that export orientation was funded by export orientation was based on heavy imports. Without imports, they could not export. And how did they import? They were importing inputs using short-term lending, short-term loans given by short-term lenders, like film producers. They lend money for 3 months and collect 40% rate of interest, or even 120%. It's almost like film financiers and funding the producers. This is exactly like that. The day the short-term lenders withdrew the lending, the whole thing collapsed. Everything collapsed. This was the topic of my PhD thesis. I called it Dependent Vulnerability of Manufactured Exports of East Asian NICs, an inquiry into the viability of replicating the East Asian model of development. It is with a profound sense of humility I would like to say that I predicted partly East Asian financial crisis 10 years before it occurred. It has come out in the form of a book, Myths and Realities of East Asian Model of Development. It got a wonderful review in the Journal of Economic Literature, UK. Unfortunately, except the final proofreader and myself, no one read the book. I don't think people read the book. And the next one is 2000.com downturn. We know that. It collapsed. There was an exaggerated imagination about the .com boom. And that exaggerated imagination led to a lot of speculation. And you know how a leading firm in India, Satyam, behaved. There was no Satyam in Satyam. Unrealistic speculations. And now there is some control on the whole thing. Right? It's recovered. Actually, the software company dramatically recovered. Then 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. Again, what happened? We developed a mad mania for market forces and privatization. I would call it over-belief on privatization, over-belief on marketization, over-belief on market forces, over-belief on deregulation. And then the private sector misbehaved. Then it was for the first time we realized that you cannot leave everything to the market forces. There is no automaticity about market forces. There is a need for government intervention to correct market forces. So if there is there should be no government failure to correct market failure. This lesson we learned. Then comes 2020 global economic paralysis triggered by the health-related problem, COVID-19, and pushing us to the global economy grinding to the halt, complete halt. You all know that. I don't have to convince that. I'm not going to elaborate on it because every day you read about it, you watch about it, and you know everything about the magnitude of the problem. But countries are just recovering, slowly recovering. In the past, whenever policymakers try to pull the economies out of depressed condition, the focus was on stimulating consumption and investment. As John Franklin Roosevelt did in America, they were stimulating consumption, stimulating investment. Every time we try to stimulate consumption and investment. But now, to recover economies, the focus is on R&D and research and innovation. Knowledge is a source and innovation is a force. Topmost priority is given to that. People are looking for innovative ideas, even to survive in the face of the COVID-19, in the face of all the problems created by COVID-19. The people are trying to identify many ways of surviving, running parallel with that. Business as usual. Dubai is doing it. You may not believe. Day after tomorrow, I am leaving for Dubai. There is an international conference organized by the newly created Department for International Cooperation by Government of Dubai. They are organizing a very big conference, inviting 6,000 participants, and it is at the World Trade Center on 15th. I'm leaving on 14th. You may wonder, my God, amidst all these vagaries, why did they want to prove that if you follow very strictly the norms and abide by the norms, health-related norms, business can be as usual. It appears the distance between two participants will be 10 feet. It's a huge hall which can easily accommodate many people. And of course, I have to undergo all these RT-PCR tests and this and that. Otherwise, they will not allow me to board the aircraft. That's another thing. It's okay. So people are trying to identify viable avenues of surviving, facing challenges, and try to seize new opportunities. We are going to look at all these things. Next slide, please. Now, whatever you try to reset, there are few things you cannot reset. I am totally convinced of that. These are all national development priorities. You cannot reset for the sake of resetting. You cannot do that. There are certain priorities each government, each country is supposed to achieve. Excuse me, and am I very visible? Are you able to see me properly? Am I keeping the cell phone in the right position? Can someone respond? Hello?
Sir,
Hello?
sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Are you able to see me properly? Is it okay? Is everything okay?
Yes, sir. Going good,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. Very good. Very good. This is what I wanted to know. Because there is dead silence. I don't know what is going on at the other end. Okay. I'm happy I double checked with that. So there are
Okay.
national strategic development priorities. One cannot reset. There are three. One is converting comparative advantages into competitiveness, resource-based comparative advantages of countries into competitiveness, converting commodities into high value-added products. Prosperity is essentially a function of value addition. Africa, you take the example of Africa, the continent encompasses a huge reservoir of, you name anything on the planet: diamond, gold, silver, platinum, lithium, oil, a very high quality of oil. Wherever they dig, they hit very high quality of oil. Africa encompasses everything. Huge reservoir of agricultural resources, mineral resources, human resources. But the country's contribution to the global value added, manufacturing value added, is less than 2%, 1.7%. They export everything in raw form. Seaweed collected from Zanzibar is just given to the Chinese agents without even cleaning. They don't even clean it using the seawater. Immediately it is given in raw form at incredibly low price. When the high rate of value-added products in newly industrializing countries, and the emerging economies lifted millions of people out of poverty. Commodity boom led high rate of growth in Africa, pushed many more millions into the poverty trap. It bears testimony to the fact that countries will have to climb the ladder of value addition. Very, very important. See, take the example of palm oil. The oil palm tree was originally transplanted from West Africa to Malaysia. Okay. In Malaysia, the tree, oil palm, is a potential source of wealth creation. And they produce around 85 varieties of disaggregated products based on palm oil. Whereas the same tree in Africa is a tragedy. And now Malaysia is establishing a palm oil research center in West Africa. See the irony. Why Malaysia came up? Why Malaysia made optimal use of this? Why Malaysia made optimal use of this? Very simple. Malaysia applied science and technology to all aspects of farm development and product development. By effecting simple changes in farm management, efficient farm management, they increased the productivity dramatically. And they got into the production of different varieties, disaggregated products based on palm oil. So they just applied science and technology. Unless you apply science and technology, you cannot climb the ladder of value addition, and you cannot produce product according to international standards, complying with quality control norms. Otherwise, you cannot survive in an internationally competitive environment. So they transplanted the tree from West Africa, and now Malaysia, it is a potential source of wealth creation. And in Africa, it's a tragedy. You name any commodity in Africa: coffee tragedy, cocoa tragedy, tea tragedy, copper tragedy. I would say even diamond tragedy, on the gold tragedy, because they don't add value. They sell everything in raw form. That's why intermittent high rate of growth enjoyed by African countries based on commodity boom-led growth pushed many more millions into the poverty trap. There is evidence, empirical evidence to prove that. Then converting marginalized urban and rural communities into development catalysts. This is another one. You cannot reset these things. You see how people live in the urban peripheries. It's almost like cowshed. It's eyesore. You cannot even look at the slums and look at the fate of poor people in the rural areas. And now they introduce the what is called universal basic income. Many countries introduced, and then the countries which implemented universal basic income means unconditional transfer of money every month to the poorest of the poor in order for them to subsist in a very decent way, decent subsistence, in order for them to have dignified living. So it is being appreciated very well. Even one famous Tamil poet, Subramania Bharati, once said, if one person dies of starvation for want of basic income, we should destroy the entire universe. This is what he said. This is the rationale. This is the rationale of, this is the, I'm sorry, somebody is calling, I cancelled that. This is the rationale of universal basic income. Then last year, before the advent of this the COVID-19, the spirit of universal basic income was fading away. Countries lost their interest in implementing universal basic income, and they gained the feeling that they were pretending beyond the means. And then came COVID-19, reinforcing the need for universal basic income. It is not charity. It is not charity. It is not an act of charity. It is indeed an act of human justice. But the problem is, it cannot be given to poor people like manna from heaven. You will make them lazy. People are really concerned about it. So how long you can give? As we say, aid to end aid, you give aid to end aid. You should give universal basic income to end universal basic income one day. And one day they should rise above subsistence. That calls for apt policy space, institutional direction, business support services, in order for people to get into. See, before the evolution of industrial revolution, it was the household sector which responded to growing demand for goods and services. It is called industrious revolution. Households, there was no factory, no workshop, nothing. So the household sector responded to growing demand for goods and services. The neo-industrious revolution is now taking place. In Kanyakumari district, in Nagarkovil, almost all the bakeries, they don't run any factories to bake anything. They are subcontracting the production of cake, jalebi, all varieties of sweets to the household sector. Everything comes from there. They are collecting it. That's all. They don't run. So household sector is participating in the local value chain. This is very interesting. So what is needed is, as Mahatma Gandhi once said, shift from mass production to production by the mass. This is the need of the hour. And today, I think policy intervention should encourage the so-called neo-industrious revolution. You create an enabling policy environment for them to flourish, render institutional technical assistance, create common facility centers for them to come and make use of this product, and also render business support services as public goods. This is the only salvation to get people empowered in productive activities and related service activities. Please go to the next one. Next slide. Resetting for the, I said what should not be reset. I gave you 3 points, but there are so many other things where we have to reset. Where the areas are new style of living, new mode of working, new patterns of production, new means of selling products and services. Then it is important to realize that technological marvels play a key role in digitizing and digitalization of the new day. New style of living. People are very well used to new style of living now. As it is, I am just giving this lecture without any formal dress. I am in casual dress. So what will happen? The demand for casual dress is increasing. Capture that niche. Try to turn out products, a casual dress, which is in great demand. You can capture that niche marketplace. You can even, as students of management, you can make an inventory of casual items demanded by the people to suit the new style of living and the new mode of working. People are sitting at home and doing the job. You know that 80% of the job is done at home. the new patterns of production. The pattern of demand changes. See, for example, of course, if each family, upper middle class, upper middle class, and the rich people have cars. I cannot think of a single family which does not own a car, at least a small car. Now, because of COVID, even the lower income people, poor people, would like to have a car, not necessarily brand new car, second-hand car. So the demand for second-hand cars increases. Now, the automobile sector is doing very well because people prefer new models, particularly the demand for new models of cars is increasing like anything. 6 months ago, it was in deep recession. Suddenly, this trend emerged. So yesterday's sunset industry, maybe today's sunrise industry. When the sun sets into the sea this evening, tomorrow it will definitely rise from the sea tomorrow morning. So almost one sunset industry may not remain as a sunset industry. It may re-emerge in a different form. The new means of selling products, everything is sold online very efficiently. Our distribution system works extremely well. Companies are doing extremely well. People are happy. Customers are happy. Consumers are. You are seeing it. I don't have to convince you. And the next thing is digitizing and digitalization. You have to understand the difference between digitizing and digitalization. Digitizing means you store the information related to a product specific information. Data is systematically digitized. You store it. And what is digitized is used as a potential source of dynamic growth, new growth. Then you digitalize. When you apply all those things contained in the digitization form and to a particular sector, for example, digitalize agriculture, digitalize industrial sector, digitalize the service sector. That means you are applying what is already stored as a source of a dynamic source of wealth creation. Let us go to the next one. COVID-19 facets and business opportunities. I have 3 L's here. First, life, livelihoods, lifestyle, and leverages. Dear students of management, in these 3 areas, new things are emerging. So many business opportunities are arising in saving life. But please go beyond the production of the so-called, mask and sanitizer. I'm going to explain some disaggregated products now. So in saving lives, there are new business opportunities emerging. In saving livelihoods, new business opportunities are surfacing. In adapting to the new lifestyle, so many new products are surfacing. Then liberating with the virtual world. What is going to happen is everything will happen in the virtual world. We are already seeing that. It is quite possible that schools may be closed down, colleges may be closed down, universities may be closed down. Everything may be in the virtual world. It may happen. We don't know. Even after the end of COVID-19, many institutions may prefer to offer everything online. I would call it, we are all going to be in open innovation and value creation network. This is the phrase I would like to use. Open innovation and value creation network. If you have the enhanced adaptive capabilities and skills to use modern technology and to commercialize new knowledge, you can participate effectively and create wealth for you. Let us now look at what is happening to each L. I'm just giving some examples, and I'll give you some ideas, but you can, as students of management, you will have to do a lot of work to elaborate. And going beyond mask production and sanitizers. So we say that, oh, how to save lives? Come on, produce more masks and sanitizers because there's a big demand for it. No, go beyond that. There are so many things being invented. Immune boosting products based on traditional knowledge and medical practices. People are going to villages to collect information on good stamina food, immune boosting products. If so many research institutions have discovered, they invented many things, not invented, we have discovered many research findings based on the traditional knowledge of people living in remote villages, in the isolated villages. I was in Sudan once as a UNIDO representative, and I had implemented a project in 147 villages, 700 kilometers away from Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. And when you are in the city, sometimes you get into big shopping malls, almost like Lulu Mall or any highly sophisticated shopping mall in Europe. Much better than in some African countries, in the cities and towns, you have much more sophisticated shopping mall. But the moment you travel 50 kilometers away from the town, it is nothing but a Stone Age. Stone Age. I have seen it with my eyes. Once I was flying a UN helicopter, I was looking for villages, no village. I asked them, where are the villages? They said, wait, it will come. Then suddenly I saw 25 huts. I said, is it a village? It's a village. Please stop here. Then land here. We landed there and virtually nothing except one bore well dug by UNICEF. Then I asked somebody to translate what the people were saying. I said, when someone falls sick, what happens? The answer was, he dies. Can you imagine? I'm not making an exaggerated imagination of what I saw in Sudan. Then we came out a program called Humanitarian Plus, because in a country like that, 25 years of war, 2 million killed and 4 million stranded, everything was humanitarian centric. If you go and talk to anybody, any donor about technologically advanced and technologically advanced and ecologically sound means of protection, they may ask you to get out because you are not relevant there. So when I assumed office, I wrote to my headquarters and to the counterpart saying that I feel enormously incompetent to make interventions befitting our mandate. We are not relevant here. Please leave me in peace for 6 months. I went to remote villages, interacted with the internally displaced persons who returned to the areas of origin and choice, asked them simple questions. When you go and interview villages, please go there with rigorous questions. Okay, they know that the surveys will keep you employed and they will be jobless and they will be starving. They know that. So simple questions. What are your priorities? They listed 3 priorities. We want to own a piece of land. We want some assistance from international communities to cultivate the land, increase agricultural productivity, reduce post-harvest losses, and get into some semi-processing activities. Then we want some assistance to sell the products in neighboring villages, add value to the products and neighboring village and sell it in the neighboring village. We captured a niche out of that. I want to make it very short, to make the long story short, by implementing a project funded by the Japanese government, 1.4 million they gave from the Japanese contribution to the UN Trust Fund for Human Security. We redefined human security. If they don't, when there is no availability and access to food, it is human insecurity. Government of Japan accepted that. We eradicated poverty in 140 villages. World Bank came and conducted the survey of the effectiveness, relevance, and effectiveness of intervention. They published their nice report. You can Google community-based development projects in Sudan. They said what UNIDO does is the best model for post-conflict recovery and development in terms of sensitization, target beneficiaries, local empowerment, tangible impact, and sustainability. They used all these parameters. You can read. So it is important that we collect, take care of the local communities, collect the information from the inhabitants of remote villages. They are already practicing it. I can give you one example. The extract from a rare wild plant which grows in the desert. You don't plant, you don't water, you don't maintain it. You don't take care of that. But the extract from the leaf of a wild plant in Sudan heals the open wound of diabetic patients. But they are not able to get the patents registered for want of investment. They are not able to commercialize for want of business support services. So I think you have to go in that direction. So people are now, you realize that there's a big demand for traditional foods consumed by our great parents. And many shops are now selling it. This is another area. And now I have given only the outline. I have given only the title. As students of management, reflect on it. Go and collect information. Prepare an inventory of those products. And then try to make business out of that, capital out of that. Then high-tech and sophisticated testing. It is called instant testing equipment. I Googled. I said, okay, what people want to test the blood pressure, oxygen content of the blood, and instantly you can test it. And there are 120 equipments like that, costing around 1,500 rupees, 2,000 rupees, 4,000 rupees. Like that, you can. There are so many students are inventing. One guy was studying in an engineering college in a remote village. eh, he has invented an impulse which is attached to the cell phone, which gives some indication when there is some irregularity in your heartbeat. It says, go to the doctor, there is something wrong with your heart. Like this, you have to find out. There's a transformative shift towards R&D and innovation. So R&D innovation can transform many things, and they can enable individuals to commercialize what is being discovered. Then mobile clinics. This is another example. You don't have to be a doctor to run the clinic, but you can the owner of a company which runs mobile clinics and within the framework of codified norms. This is one example. Then let us go to business opportunities, creating sustainable sources of livelihood. I can talk about only the migrant workers, and that's a big issue. Because in the areas of origin, many went back to the areas of origin, except Kerala. Kerala is a paradise for them, so they want to settle down here. From other states, they all migrated to the areas of origin, and the areas of origin, there is no source. I think what the Sudanese told me may be relevant here. Piece of land to be owned, and some assistance from the government to cultivate the land, some assistance to reduce post-harvest losses, some assistance to, and there is, if you get into biodynamic organic agriculture, you can sell the products like hotcake in the world, everywhere. When I went to BNI in 1980, I could not see a single tropical fruit or vegetable in the shelves of the supermarket. Today, all the supermarkets are filled with this. I can give you one coveted product, Murunga. Have you heard of Murunga leaf and Murunga powder, Murunga stem, Murunga honey, Murunga oil? These are all being sold like hot, very high price. So many, I know my friends, IIT gold medalist, who held many good coveted positions across the country, in the US, the Philippines, everywhere. He came back to his village, converted 300 acres into a big Murunga farm. He is just actually growing them following biodynamic organic agricultural practices. Another gentleman who was a big technocrat working for a big sugar company, here he wants now 400 acres of Murunga farm, because there's a big demand for Murunga because of the high iron content contained in the Murunga leaf and other products of Murunga. It is being sold like hotcake because pharmaceutical companies are using, and the food processing companies are using, and also other companies are using. So this is all, I think, 3 companies which are using the Murunga products: food processing, then cosmetic companies, and pharmaceuticals. Yes, food processing companies, pharmaceutical companies, and this one. So these 3 companies are really making, and the demand, global demand for Murunga products is growing at an average annual rate of 18%, and total global value is to the tune of 10 billion. It's still growing, and the supply response of Murunga products to the global market is only 30% of the total demand. The gap is 70%. So go for products of this type. Emerge as dynamic agriculturists, agri-entrepreneurs, knowledge and technology-based agri-entrepreneurs. Murunga oil, 1 liter of oil, in India, it is costing 7,000 rupees. If you send it to the global market, 38,000 rupees. Look at the margin. And then Murunga honey is also in equally big demand. So look for products of this type. These are all promising product areas. Making the household sector industrious. I already told you, citing the example of bakery, the way the small household sector is. I can give you another example. See, if you are able to produce a tiny product according to the international standards and quality control norms, you can participate in the global value chain. I know one guy sitting in a city, living in a city in Africa. I will not name the city and the country. It is known for the highest rate of crime. The international reputation is, upon landing there, you get killed. This is the reputation. Sitting in that small house, that guy is producing rubber-based, non-automotive component for aircrafts. So if you have the skill to turn out any product with a high degree of precision, you really participate in the global value chain. And then empowering rural communities in biodynamic organic farm. You start a big farm, give employment to 100 or 200 persons. My friends are doing it in Tirunelveli, Radhapuram, Valliyur, and so many Keralites are buying land. A place called Radhapuram. My God, the Keralites come there and buy 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres, and they convert them into big farms. Murunga, alma, and other products there. These are all export-oriented crops. But it should be 100% organic. If you buy a plain land which is virgin, but never used for cultivation, on day one it is organic. But if you buy land which was already used by somebody with inorganic fertilizers and this and that, you have to wait for 3 years. It's better to barren land, hitherto not used by anybody, then day one it is organic. Scaling up of activities of micro and small enterprises taking advantage of the new, micro enterprises and small enterprises are now redefined. Even if you have 1 crore and you have 5 crores turnover, it is still micro. And there are so many facilities, grants, institutional support services rendered by government. People are not aware of that. If you want to emerge as a dynamic micro entrepreneur, you can get so much from the Ministry of Trade and Industry and Ministry of Small MSC, MSM. You can get a lot. So please disseminate knowledge on that. Try to acquire knowledge on that. Try to emerge as and making use of all the support systems available. There are common facility centers for which you don't have to pay anything. Use those facilities to enhance the quality of your product and penetrate coveted markets. Okay. Then business opportunities stemming from the new style of living. Again, I said, it is up to you. You take an inventory of products which suit the new style of living. How the style of living is completely changed. And production, marketing of cash, I mentioned that, refurbishing old computers. This is another area, business area. In Nigeria, 14 unemployed young boys and girls, engineers, they started a company to refurbish old computers. And their computers are as good as new. And since everything is online, there's a big demand for computers. And they're refurbishing it and they're selling them for $50 or $100, incredibly low price. They are already millionaires, to be honest. They are already millionaires. Preference for individual houses to apartments. That's another big area. People don't want to live in apartments because if they happen to be inside the elevator, there's a spelling mistake here, apartments, but actually it is N is missing. It escaped my attention, kindly ignore that. If it is to be distributed, kindly add N here. If somehow that mistake escaped my attention, I don't know how did it happen. Okay, so they don't want to live in crowded apartments. So there's a big demand for individual houses. Then efficient and reliable home delivery system, that is already happening. Commercializing assisting, that I already said. Human repeller, that's another one. You must have heard about dog repeller. There is something which is attached to the stick you carry. The dogs will run away from there. Like that, it may be possible for someone to invent a human repeller, means another person will not come and transmit the disease to you, particularly COVID. Home for the retirees, a big demand for it. Okay, this is another area. The last one is actually home theaters, home gym, and home garden. This is the last one. I think there's a huge demand for it. Companies are offering. If you go and tell reasonably rich people, so you don't worry about anything, sir. We will take care of everything. Everything is linked to your cell phone, and through electronic impulse, you can monitor, you can water your plants, the home garden, by pressing a button in a cell phone, attached to the cell phone, and you don't. It's not a painstaking affair. These things are now available. You know that, and this is a big business. Creating the home garden and maintaining garden. Home theaters. People don't want to go to the normal theater now. What? And normally it costs around 12 lakhs to install a home theater, but it can be reduced to 4 lakhs, it seems. People are already doing. Young boys and girls are doing it now. Get into that one. So this type of thing you have to look for. And then business opportunities in the virtual world. This is very, very, very important. Participating in open innovation and value creation network. As I said, if you have the enhanced adaptive capabilities to use modern technology and to commercialize new knowledge, you can really participate in the global value chain. There is no doubt about it. And the three ingredients are connect, comply, and compete. First, you have to establish your link with a potential buyer or joint partner. Connect yourself with the global world. Then comply with all the norms of enhancing competitiveness and compete successfully. I will give you one example to illustrate this. You must have heard about cassava, kappa. In Kerala, it's a staple food people are very fond of eating. It is called white gold in Thailand. You know, they are actually the factories. I have seen it through my eyes. Factories are not running big farms to collect cassava. They are collecting it from the agents. Cassava grows everywhere, that in the backyard of the house, here and there. You tell the agent, every day I want 2 tons of cassava. You give them relatively attractive price, it will come. From where do they collect? You don't worry about it. And then you dry it and convert into pellets. And there's a huge demand for cassava pellets in Europe. They are using it for industrial starch and also animal feed, particularly after the mouth disease, cow mouth disease, mad mouth disease or something. And after that, the demand for these cassava pellets increased like that. And it's called white gold. Thailand survived the East Asian financial crisis because of 23 billion baht they earned through the export of cassava. So this is, I'm just giving, for all these things, you have to connect, comply, and compete. Okay. And then key determinants of seizing new business opportunities. As I said, enhanced adaptive capabilities and skills to use it. I already said it repeatedly. And open innovation and value creation. You get into that, you try. In life, you don't get yourself fed up with a failure. If you take the example of Abraham Lincoln, at the age of 36, he wanted to be a big businessman, miserably failed. At 42, again, he started another business, miserably failed. At the age of 52, he wanted to be a senator, defeated. At 54, he wanted to become vice president of the US, miserably failed. Again, he started business, again failed. Then he told his wife that he would like to contest for the post of President of America. His wife immediately took him to a psychiatric doctor. He said he was totally convinced that the husband was mad. And he was taken for psychiatric treatment because this man said, I will be the next president of something. At the age of 60, he stood for the post of President of America, won. And he turned out to be the best president America ever had. Look at the way, if you have perseverance, you can definitely come up. What you have to think is, whatever you are supposed to do is within your capability. When I was a student, I was a mediocre. I was not a bright student. One day, I just read Elements of Commerce for the quarterly exam for 2 hours using a Bazaar notebook, ordinary Bazaar notebook. Bazaar note, easy to comprehend, easy to understand, that type of notebook. I got it from a shop from Tirunelveli railway station when I was a student of St. Xavier's College in Palangota. I spent 2 hours. 2 hours. And when I went for the exam next day, he said, I answered 3 out of 5. I came to the feeling that I could write the answers for 5 questions. I was freely at ease in writing. After 1 week, when the lecturer distributed the marks, I stood first in the class, 47 out of 50. Then I realized 2 things. Whatever I am supposed to study is within my capability. All that I need to do is to spend time. Is it rocket science? No. I started from that day onwards. I turned out to be a totally different student. And the outcome, BA first class gold medal, MA first class gold medal, MPhil gold medal, PhD predicted the East Asian financial crisis. I believed in that. So it's a very simple thing. Whatever you are supposed to do, please be convinced that it is definitely within your capability. All that you need to do is to spend time. Nothing will fall like manna from heaven. You have to work for that. You have to spend a lot of time. Otherwise, it will not come to you. Okay. Then prepare for the upcoming creative distraction. I want to spend at least 5 minutes on this. What is happening is the so-called technological marvels. We started from water power, steam power, then mechanical power, computers, and then new technologies, upgraded technology. Now we are talking about destructive technology. Amazing, amazing. We are soon we are going to work. Boys and girls will be conditioned to work with robots, smart machines, and I would say artificial intelligence. These three, and this is called Industry 5.0. Industry 5.0 is confined only to these three. You are conditioned to work with robots and smart machines and artificial intelligence. If you look at the disruptive technologies, advanced digital production system, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and then big data management, cloud computing, 3D printer. They are now talking about bio 3D printer. Soon, you can go to the pharmacy and ask for kidney, lung, heart, everything. These things will be produced by a 3D printer, bio 3D printer. So yesterday's fiction is today's reality. Armstrong landing on the moon, man landing on the moon was a fiction, but today it's a reality. So we are going in that direction. So we have to be well prepared for it. We have to be well prepared for the creative destruction triggered by disruptive technologies. And now they talk about what? MindNet. That's very dangerous. They say that they install somehow insert an electronic impulse in your brain, and you can immediately discover what other people are thinking about you or whatever is running in the minds of other people. I hope such a thing will not be discovered. MindNet, Internet of Things, Internet of Services, electromobility. So where are we heading to? Can we be bystanders at the current technological feast? Not. But don't get frightened. Please, I don't want you to be frightened. You may gain the feeling of what is this guy saying? So everything is dim, dark, and dull, and I may not be part of it. No, you are going to be part of it. Take the example of computer. What happened to computer? When the computers were introduced in Kerala, everybody was against it, including the ruling party, Communist Party, which was ruling the state. The only reason, all the typists will be thrown out of job. They interpreted computers as a substitute for typewriter. So typists will be losing the job. All these typists working in departments will be thrown out of job. So we are against computer. And look at the millions of computer-related jobs created. How many millions are working now on computer-related jobs? And now Kerala, which was against the introduction of computer, encompasses 3 state tech parks. I think the 5th one is in the pipeline. Very good, very encouraging. So these things will, each one will come out with, see, in life, each challenge is an opportunity. Each challenge is an opportunity. Our personal and professional response to convert challenges into opportunities and opportunities into sustainable sources of wealth creation is a discovery process. I am 101% sure that the students of St. Joseph's College will discover the process. Then, as I said, sunset and sunrise industry, some of them are not relevant. This was prepared when the COVID-19 started. See, travel, tourism, automobile, entertainment, all these things were supposed to be sunset, but some of them are now sunrise industry. Theaters are running now. People are going to theaters and watching with the limited and within the framework of new codified norms. Automobile is now moved to sunrise. There's a big automobile is doing extremely well. Luxury products, oil, gas, construction. Now construction is also started recovering. Travel, slowly it is picking up in spite of COVID. It is picking up. So, but these things are really sunrise industry. Look at all these things. I may not have time to read out everything. I would like to spend 1 minute on the gig economy. What is gig economy? Hereafter, young boys and girls may not get a regular job. You join a company and after 60, 65, you retire in that job. That may not happen. You are supposed to be imbued with multifaceted talents. You are a micro-entrepreneur. Each one is a micro-entrepreneur capable of selling different skills and different talents. And then you sell it. You sell it for a given period, for a given company, and get paid very well. fabulously. Perhaps you may earn more than that. So you will be a rolling stone, and be prepared for that. It's called gig economy. You don't have a regular job, but occasionally you get it befitting your enhanced capabilities and skill, and get paid according to international standards. This is the best part. So healthcare, affiliate marketing, network marketing, data science, all these things are supposed to be sunrise. I'm sorry, I normally hate the PowerPoint presentation. What happens, when you make long PowerPoint presentations, you make the participants lose their power to make a point. That's why after the PowerPoint presentation, when the floor is open to question and answer, there will be dead silence. No one will respond because they lose their power to make a point. So I will go to the next one. These three things, please listen to me very carefully. I would like to draw your attention to three publications, two by McKinsey, India's Turning Point, that is McKinsey. Another one is Automation and Workforce, McKinsey, and New Jobs, this is by Ford Motor Company. I will summarize the whole thing. In India's Turning Point, they clearly say, you have to turn at the turning point. You know what will happen to you and your vehicle when you turn at the turning point. Life is full of turning points. You should be very smart to turn at the turning point and seize opportunities. They have identified 43 frontier business opportunities. Please buy this book. And I would kindly request Dr. Joseph George to buy the books for library and distribute it as extensively as possible. And they say that by 2030, there will be 90 million more workforce. And the economy will have to grow at an average annual rate of 8.5%. Of course, IMF predicted 11% growth rate. We are actually going to witness a V-shaped recovery. I am not surprised. See, I am producing 10 units today. Because of lockdown, I don't produce anything. Now, lockdown is relaxed. Then the following day, then I produce 10%. This means 100% growth. It is V-shaped. It's not a big deal. But to sustain the V-shaped recovery is a big challenge. Very big challenge. So from out of this 8.5, what are the sources of this 8.5% growth rate? IMF says that by next year, India will grow at an average annual rate of 11%. If you just divide the sources of growth contributing to this, you will realize that, okay, something will come from agriculture, something will come from manufacturing, something from service sector, and the rest has to come from dynamic sources of growth. Those dynamic sources of growth are related to the way we work with the disruptive technologies, the way we work with the so-called smart machines, robot, and artificial intelligence. This is going to be the rules of the game. And then automation and workforce, this is almost the same thing repeated in a very different way with case studies. New jobs, and this document lists 100 new jobs, and no one is prepared for it. They have systematically proved that. No institution is prepared for it. See, our institutions they produce students, educate students, prepare students for entry into employment and not for employment. After campus recruitment, what happens? The boys and girls are not relevant on day one. They are relevant only after having undergone 6-month training. So what does it mean? We are preparing them for entry into employment and not for employment. Only after having undergone 6-month training as interns or undergoing internship program, apprenticeship program, they are relevant there. So we have to revamp everything. And this report clearly says 100 jobs. Tell me who is preparing the students for that. The answer, no, nobody is preparing. Now, transformative shift. This is what Mahatma Gandhi said. We have to shift from mass production to production by the mass. We have to encourage the so-called neo-industrial revolution, get the household sector empowered in this. In fact, the so-called humanitarian assistance given by countries to particularly poor countries, donors to poor countries, should address issues related to that. Then they will be more humanitarian than humanitarians. And this is the V-shaped recovery, which is we are going to witness very soon. I think by mid next year, we will realize that even this year, at the end of this year, we will realize that economy is picking up. And this I have, V-shaped means sharp recovery, U-shaped means reluctant recovery, W-shaped means the so-called COVID variant may come, then recurrence of the same, again there will be lockdown, then the curve goes down. It's quite possible that recovers and goes down, then gets into a recession, and then recession means slowdown in economic growth for at least 3 or 4 months. 3 or 4 months, 6 months, 7 months, prolonged slowdown. It is recession. If it goes beyond a few years, then it is depression. It's deep depression. Fortunately, we were near depression, but recovered. But we cannot guarantee that. It can take even W shape. No one can predict this. And each person is a micro entrepreneur. I told you, each person should emerge, particularly management graduates will have to emerge as dynamic entrepreneurs. There are so many opportunities stemming. Please seize them. Face the challenges and seize those opportunities. And we make optimistic claims about the potential. That, the challenge is, as I said, not mass unemployment triggered by technological marvels. There are so many things which computers cannot do, robots cannot do. Artificial intelligence cannot do. They cannot do that. Discover those areas, identify those areas, and rekindle the growth of those areas so that these core areas can be so-called job-creating areas. Job-creating, fast-growing, job-creating green industries, I would like to say that, which cannot be even handled by. See, man is primary. It's important to realize that man is primary. Technology is secondary. It is again and again and again proved that. So you look for those things and make optimistic claims. I said, I am an optimist. I always make optimistic claims about. I will just wind up in 3 minutes. When the wind flows, the pessimist will say, the wind will destroy everything. The optimist will say, wind will create something good. Something good. It's a change for the good. And the realist will adjust according to the flow of the wind. I will wind up everything with the one story which happened in a church. I hope my friend Rahul does not mind. He is listening to this, I think, for the 3rd time. Rahul, please bear with me. During the Sunday Mass, a priest told the people gathered in the church, by slip of his tongue, he said, Jesus Christ fed 5,000 persons with 5 loaves of bread. He made a mistake. And he did not realize that. The priest did not stop there. He said, who can do that? One guy got up and said, I can distribute 5,000 loaves of bread to 5 persons. I can do that. Then the priest was annoyed and he ignored him. And an old lady went to the priest and told him, Father, you made this mistake. Next week, you please correct it. Next week, Sunday Mass, the priest said, Jesus Christ fed 5,000 persons with 5 loaves of bread. So last week he made a mistake. He said, Jesus Christ fed 5,000 and 5 persons with the 5,000 loaves of bread. This week he corrected that. He said, Jesus Christ fed 5,000 persons with only 5 loaves of bread. Who can do that? The same guy got up and said, I can do that. The priest was annoyed and asked him, how can you do that? He said, with what was left last week. If you have that type of optimistic mindset, you can make the impossible possible. Good luck. Thank you very much for the great opportunity. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable information.